What's up, everyone? And for those of you who are still playing World of Warcraft, give yourselves a nice round of applause because you finally get to play the game you should have been playing all along. Woo, yeah! No, but seriously, I'm pretty sure that in my very first video on why I quit WoW for Final Fantasy, this was one of my biggest issues, was the community will give Blizzard all of the information they need to make a really, really good game. And then they won't listen to you, release what they feel that they should release, and then X amount of months later, they're just going to backtrack on the whole thing, and you're stuck playing a game that you hate for so many months and then getting the game that you should have had right from the start. And if you're sick of this cycle and finally ready for a change, just remember, guys, Final Fantasy is still here, still waiting for you, and the developers actually listen to their community. So, over the next few weeks here, if you are thinking about that change, I'm going to be releasing a 4-part series covering a class comparison between tanks, healers, ranged, and melee. Now, obviously, not everything will line up perfectly considering WoW has a lot more sub-specs within classes to where Final Fantasy just has the class itself. So if your class does not get mentioned, my apologies, but I will be doing my best to give an overall generalization of the Final Fantasy class itself and why I feel that it compares to the WoW class that I picked specifically. And other people may have differing opinions, so feel free to leave those in the comments down below, as always. But let's get started this week with the tanks. The first tank we're going to talk about is the Gunbreaker, which is actually the newest one introduced within the Shadowbringers expansion. Now, the Gunbreaker, as the name sort of states, is a sword-wielding gunman that is actually probably one of the fastest gameplay tanks available. And if that's something that interests you as far as coming from WoW where globals are 1 second and you really can't get over the really long globals within Final Fantasy, the Gunbreaker may be an option just from that aspect alone, considering you will be weaving a lot of OGCDs in between your normal global cooldowns. As far as healing goes, it's rather weak considering its only heal is like a hot that doesn't really tick for an insane amount at all, but its sturdiness is actually pretty good. I mean, it has a lot of low cooldown but low reductions, so you can pretty much constantly have like a 15%-ish reduction rolling almost the entire fight. So that's pretty good. Now, the other thing that makes the Gunbreaker really insane is just damage. It is probably one of the best damage tanks within the game, and its AoE is really good and really consistent to where other tanks are more bursty when it comes to that. So because of all of these aspects rolled together, I would probably have to compare it either to maybe a Brewmaster Monk just because of its sturdiness, once again, more like a stagger effect, as well as from what I remember, Brewmaster's AoE was pretty insane. So I'd have to compare it maybe to that, or possibly even a Guardian Druid. I know that over the course of the years, they've sort of nerfed Guardian Druid healing and made them more of just what they used to be as sort of meat shields. And with a combination of some talents and legendaries, I know that they can do a lot of AoE damage and sort of absorb small portions over time. So it's, even if you don't have a major cooldown rolling, you're always sort of mitigating something. So overall, I think that those are probably the two tanks that I would compare most to the Gunbreaker. Next up is the Warrior, and while it is probably one of the slowest feeling tanks within the game, if you really enjoy super high burst windows that can essentially rival a lot of DPS within the game itself for a short amount of time, or just insane self-healing, especially when it comes to possibly soloing old content or farming mounts, etc., then the Warrior might be that option for you. Now, while that burst window is relatively short, you can do it every minute and a half or so, and its self-healing only has a cooldown of 25 seconds. Now, the great thing about this self-healing is essentially whatever damage you deal can then be converted into healing. So when coupled with that burst window, you can basically go from dead to full for, a good majority of fights. And I would have to say that if you're going to compare it to any class within the game, why not compare it to really high self-healing tanks like a Blood Death Knight or possibly even a Demon Hunter? Third on the list, let's talk about the Dark Knight. And if you really think that this is just a Death Knight from WoW, you might be mistaken, because while it does boast its shadowy, unholy figure, can also summon companions to aid it in battle, it doesn't actually have the self-healing that you would think to compare it to a Death Knight. Now, its burst is a little underwhelming, and its skill sets are pretty unique and are very flashy. So if you're an edgelord, this is definitely the class for you. But if you had to compare it to a WoW character, I would have to say it's possibly like a Death Knight if you take away the healing aspect, but maybe the shielding aspect alone from Death Striking Blood Shields, or possibly even the Vengeance Demon Hunter Soul Barrier. But since the Dark Knight doesn't heal, the shielding that it provides through the Blackest Night, which is a pretty short cooldown that provides a 30% absorb of your health bar, but utilizes mana, meaning you have to choose to absorb damage rather than to use it on a damaging skill. So it's a bit in the limbo area in my opinion, and I really didn't think that it compared exactly to a WoW class. But if you think this is something you're interested in, just know that the class starts out at level 30, and it could be worth a try, even in just your spare time. And finally on this list, we have reached the Paladin. Now, it's typically just like a Paladin in World of Warcraft in some regards. It has really good damaging skills, can provide some self-healing, and uses the standard sword and board method. Now, the really cool thing is that shields in this game do give you extra armor, so it does provide a little bit more tankiness, baseline without cooldowns, than most of the other tanks within the game. It does also have some really good sort of cooldowns to help out the raid, meaning that a lot of people do bring a Paladin to the group regardless of what the best tanks are at the time. So if you play a Paladin in WoW, you will most certainly enjoy it here in the game. And the other class that I would have to say it is similar to is probably the Prot Warrior. Obviously, if you enjoy sword and board, then this is another reason for you to choose it, but it does have some unique cooldowns similar to the way that like a Vigilance would work within WoW, and overall I think that that makes it a really good candidate for either the Paladin or the Warrior. While these lists are pretty much my own opinion and not really a direct comparison since they are two different games, I'm curious to see what you guys have to say. So if you're still playing WoW, or you just picked up Final Fantasy, or you maybe have been playing Final Fantasy for a while, feel free to leave your comments down below on what classes you think should have made the tanking list that I didn't put, or if you would move some things around and why you would do so. If you really enjoy my content, please hit that like and subscribe button. It helps me out greatly. It also keeps Bahamut happy, of course. And if you really want to see some tanking gameplay, I do main a Gunbreaker within Final Fantasy now, so feel free to check me out on Twitch. The link for that will be somewhere down below. Until next time, guys, take care.